Hello, everyone. Wanted to make a very brief video just discussing in a very, brief way the second essay assignment or some request for another video. So I'm doing it. First of all, I should say that, whatever approach you want to take to this, go ahead and do it. The only requirement really is that, you should consider the ideas of Jonas and technology and responsibility in relation to the possibility of the singularity as discussed by Bostrom and Chalmers. So it just says you have to discuss the singularity in light of Jonas's ideas. Well, that's a general requirement. I hope it's not vague. The only question there is, what are Jonas's ideas? And really, that's pretty much up to you. There's some obvious things. First of all, the general idea that Jonas had that the nature of modern technology was such that we are in a completely new position with regard to the Earth as a whole and with regard to the future because of the power of modern technology to make effects that are global and that affect nature itself, obviously, and effects for human beings and for nature, but especially for human beings that stretch out indefinitely into the future. And that this calls for a new ethics because the old ethics, he says, all of our old ethical frameworks, whether they be utilitarianism, Kantianism, various religious traditions, they were all an ethics of the here and the now. At least when it comes to large public policy decisions like the implementation of technology, let's say something like the implementation of the World Wide Web that brought the internet to the masses in the 1990s, that was an example of a change that had unpredictable results for the future and affected the whole world and will affect us for the rest of the existence of the species, you might say. Jonas had in mind, I think, something like the Manhattan Project, the implementation of the first nuclear weapon, the first practical use of nuclear power during World War II by the Americans, Robert Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project. Another example of a technology, an implementation of a technology which obviously has global effects because of the power of nuclear weapons and changes human society forever. So Jonas is not thinking of the normal everyday, which is pretty much still covered by the old ethics, I would say. He's talking about big decisions, which should be public policy decisions, often not enough democratic input, as we could probably all agree when it comes to these big changes and how they should be handled. So I'm just asking you, that basic idea, of course, is just one part, but the perhaps most essential part of Jonas's thinking. The other being the attempt to come up with a new ethics which is adequate for our new situation, and that is something that he struggles with, that he admits that is quite difficult to come up with. But one of the things that he does suggest is because of the lack of proportion between knowledge and power, let's say, we have to adopt an ethics of humility and carefulness, which is just to say, because our capacity to anticipate, to know all of the important effects of our technologies, new technologies especially, right, we're thinking of, is always outrun by the power of those technologies itself. That is, our knowledge of the ramifications of the results will never be adequate, especially considering the power of modern technology, that we have to adopt a position of carefulness and humility, understanding that we are ignorant. So one of, I think, the obvious implications of that is we have to be ready. Not necessarily we have to simply do it, but we have to be ready to forego certain technologies. And all of this has obvious implications for the singularity, because if there's one thing, one event that fits into Jonas's idea of the newness of modern technology. It's the very conception of the singularity, which is this global and secular event in human history where there will be a before and after. The impact couldn't be greater, at least the singularity as it's conceived. I don't know if it's a practical thing. I always have to have that caveat. Um, and so if there's the very notion of the singularity itself, if you read Bostrom or others, is that we obviously do not know, could not know, considering the nature of a superintelligence, we could not know all of the important consequences of the singularity. It would be impossible by definition because the superintelligence is going to be able to do things that we can, and we can't predict what those things are or how they will be done. So that is the basic framework, I suppose. Within that, it's really a matter of your opinion, and it's a matter of focusing on what you think is important. But the only real requirement of the essay is that you keep in mind the fundamentals, the fundamental points within Jonas's essay, whatever you say they are. They really have to be supplemented. What I said here has to be supplemented by the details of what's in the essay. And looking at the idea of the singularity as described by Chalmers and Bostrom in light of Jonas's ideas, that discussion, wherever it goes, it's just a matter of keeping in mind Jonas and pretty much maybe even applying them, Jonas's ideas to the idea of the singularity. I'm thinking a lot of mostly of Bostrom, but Chalmers obviously is important too. Just for example, the very notion I'm just giving you an excerpt from his longer essay, but the very notion of mind uploading, which is really what he says we should do, what we would need to do in response to the emergence of a superintelligence, is just the sort of thing that Jonas would be like, wait, we really have to figure this one out before we go ahead and do it, because there's no turning back when we do it. You have to make sure that this is a step that we want to take, not just a step that we can take, which I think Chalmers is very, very much aware of. So that's just an example. So if you have any questions, any further questions after watching this video, please feel free to contact me and we can talk about the essay. Either email me or call me on the cell phone number that I gave you on the syllabus.